Let's go ahead and bring in the power panel now. Lauren Wright is a Princeton University political scientist, and Scott Bolden is the former D.C. Democratic Party chairman. Thanks to you both for taking time with us today. Lauren, Trump world sources have told our reporters that the way they see it, the more Republicans in the field, the better Trump's chances are. They want to keep encouraging as many people to throw their hat in the ring as possible. Does that square with reality as you see it?
I mean, they happen to be right. And when Trump says a lot of these people are running for second place, I think that's unfortunately true. I am so shocked at the extent to which this is the same story as 2016. It was a huge field of 17 candidates. Trump comes in with name recognition already in the 90s. The next closest person is Jeb Bush in the 80s. And Trump spent the whole time attacking him till he was literally and figuratively off the debate stage. And that's what's happening again. DeSantis happens to have a political ace up his sleeve. That's not just such a secret to contrast Trump, which is the way he dealt with COVID in Florida. He had very similar outcomes or better outcomes than other states on deaths. And it was in total contrast to how Trump dealt with the pandemic. Liberals and conservatives agree on aspects of that. And he should be attacking Trump every day on presidential leadership on an issue that really threw the country into chaos in a way we haven't seen since the 1930s. That should be DeSantis's message right now, tomorrow, next week, next month.
Scott, let's turn to Biden's campaign message. What do you make of that Politico reporting that they're really prepping for any of these candidates to emerge as a front runner? They're kind of gaming this as if a wild card is going to be the ticket.
Well, the wild card is the New York indictments of Donald Trump and possible federal indictments or even indictments in Georgia. In the back of their mind or the front of their mind, we've got to be thinking that Donald Trump, while he may have 30 to 40% of the Republican vote and support, that he may not be around. As a white-collar criminal defense lawyer, I can tell you it is hard to run for office, any office, if you've been indicted once, and here he may be indicted 2 or 3 times. And so I think it's smart for the Democrats to do that. But the other Republican potential in the presidential race, they're banking on that too, that if he's not there, that number 2 isn't vice president. That number 2 is where the MAGA voters go if Trump's not available. And while DeSantis seems to have about 20%, he's really not the answer either, because he's out of touch with what he's done in Florida vis-a-vis his anti-gay policies, his use of another word, anti-woke policies, but he's against diversity and inclusion. And so he's got an uphill to climb, not just to get the nominee, not to be the nominee, but also in order to win the presidency for the GOP. The GOP's got a lot of decisions to make.
A lot of decisions. Lauren, as we all know, DeSantis lags miles behind Trump, and then the rest of the field, the other 5 candidates right now, lag miles behind him. Any chance someone could emerge out front of DeSantis? I mean, we do have some time.
We have a lot of time, Jillian. You're absolutely right. And yes, there can always be a wild card. But the wild cards, you know, Glenn Youngkin, some of these other governors, Chris Sununu, these people are polling in the single digits if they're lucky. And so how do you get from 2 percentage points to double digits, which is impressive that DeSantis has already done that. But people need to attack Trump in order to change those numbers. They can't just kowtow to him and sort of tiptoe around and be scared of his base. They need to draw a contrast, and the message should be, look, this is a loser. It's actually very hard to lose an election as an incumbent president if you have a booming economy. It's actually a great opportunity to show your leadership skills when you're campaigning from behind the presidential seal. And he really messed that up for us, and no one is seemingly willing to do that.
Take a look at this. I want to, Scott, hold on. I want to get your reaction to this. The Washington Post is reporting that Biden is looking to boost the VP's profile now. Some voters fear she may have to take over if Biden wins a second term. About 2 weeks ago, Harris took part in this top-level meeting on the debt ceiling. She was photographed right there in between the president and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Critics, though, say that polishing her image might be an uphill battle.
Well, I don't think she needs her image polished. I think the Democrats need, and the White House needs to do more with her. She's a former senator, former attorney general of the most populous state in this country, and she needs to be given the opportunity to lead and to show off her skill set. The last 4 years she hasn't. Black voters and brown voters are the base of the Democratic Party. Black women voters outvote every other group in this country, and so they are looking for her to be in a leadership role, regardless of whether she's going to take over if the president does not make it, if you will, for lack of a better word, or that somehow she takes on even more responsibilities in the second term. That's a strong team. They've got a record to run on, and you're going to see more and more of her talking about infrastructure and abortion rights, as well as diversity and inclusion. Those are winning subjects for the Democrats, and they're going to be winning they're going to be winning subjects in the general election as well, because the top two GOP contenders, they're far right of that.
I guess, Scott, in the general population, folks are focused, number one, on the economy, not diversity and inclusion. That comes in at a distant, I think, 7th place to the rest of the issues the country is facing. But take a look right now, Lauren, at this. Both the president and VP are facing pretty dismal approval numbers. The latest there for President Biden, 42.1%, and for Harris, 40.3%. That is an uphill climb for them.
You know, I have strong feelings about this because I've done a lot of empirical research on Kamala Harris and her effectiveness. And the truth is, she started out the administration very popular. It's not true that she's been hidden away by the White House. My research shows she's been the most publicly active vice president in many years. I think there's much more evidence that she has messed up and misstepped on issues that she should be an authority on, like immigration, as a senator coming from a border state, and people updated their evaluations of her negatively as the administration went on. Part of that, and you know, just to contrast what Scott said a little bit, she lost among black voters heading into 2020. She didn't even make it into the same race. Biden was ahead of her among almost all subgroups of Democratic voters. And so I do think there's been evidence that she's been seen and widely seen and came in with a very exciting, historic vice presidency, and people have not been impressed with what they've seen with Harris, and I think it's very difficult to undo that.
She has not lacked a platform. Scott, we got to leave it here. I'm so sorry. I'll get you next time. I owe you one. Mark it down. Thanks to both of you for joining me.